Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is a very interesting and timely discussion. We are going to focus, the points of the discussion tonight are going to focus on the startup ecosystem in Rwanda. We are going to look at policies, we're going to look at investments, as well as innovations that really have the potential to grow this very important industry. I'm happy to welcome with us three of our guests tonight, and one of them is on Skype. And I'll start with the guests here with us in studio. I'm happy to welcome Esther Kunda, who is the Director General of Innovation and Emerging Technologies at the Ministry of ICT and Innovation. Esther Kunda, great to have you on The Square once again.
Thank you so much for having me again, Dana.
Thank you. Also joining us on behalf of the startup companies, representing startup companies, and we're excited to hear what he has to say, is Yusuf Nhwari, who is the CEO of BAG Innovation Rwanda. Yusuf, great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. And joining us all the way from Holland is the Managing Director of Norsken East Africa, Pascal Murasira. I hope we have you on Skype. Thank you for tuning in. For joining the show tonight, Pascal.
Thank you.
Great. So thank you very much to all our guests, to our viewers. As always, thank you very much for tuning in. And as we always say, please keep your comments ready. We'll be reading them out during the second part of the show using hashtag TheSquareRW on Twitter and our other social media channels. As always, The Square is also joined by its resident panelists, Charles Herbert. Great to have you on The Square.
Samir Dana, how are you?
Good. Great. We're also usually joined by Berna Namata. Unfortunately, she's not here with us tonight, but I know she'll be tuning in from wherever she is. My name's Dana PC, host of The Square, and I'm very excited about the conversation that we're going to have tonight. I think, Charles, it's the first time we're discussing the startup ecosystem
I think so.
in Rwanda. So
overdue, right?
I know, very, very overdue. But like we do before we kick off, if there are any midweek highlights, Charles, you'd like to share as a resident panelist?
We've discussed a particular topic 2-3 times, I think, on the show. But by virtue of the fact that it's recurrent, I think it needs to be given due attention. That's around mental health. Read disturbing stories of a young man who took his life, and when you hear families in all these WhatsApp groups you belong to and say, and some of the comments are very crude. A parent will post something and say, how does a parent dare to talk about their child's health status in a big forum like this, where there are hundreds of parents? So it just tells you that we do have a fundamental problem in our society, and the more we keep covering it up and not being open about it, the more it will continue hurting and paining and killing us.
And killing. Yes, it's very sad, the cases of people, dying by suicide in this country, especially of late. And I know it's something that's very close to The Square's heart. We really do, any opportunity we have to discuss mental health and mental well-being.
The most painful thing, Diana, is that it only becomes glaring when there is a death.
Yeah.
But what happens in between there is suffering.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's that suffering that needs to be seriously.
I think definitely we need to revisit the topic very soon. Esther, Yusuf, and Pascal, great to have you on the show. We'll kick off with the conversation. To our viewers, please get your comments ready. So the first, of course, part of the conversation I'd like to start off with is the policy, the regulatory framework around startup ecosystem in Rwanda. And as we know, startups are emerging legislative instruments that package strategic incentives and interventions to accelerate the formation and scale of innovative and high-growth firms. And these are the firms that we are talking about. These are the firms such as BAG Innovation that we'll be hearing from later. So Esther, the Rwanda Startup Act is aligned with our digital transformation journey and agenda and development agenda. If you could share where we are with this policy, Esther, at the moment. I know it kicked off pre-pandemic discussions of the consultative process in 2020. So where are we as Rwandans with our Startup Act? Specifically, if you can also talk about how it aims to boost the growth of startup companies in this country.
Thank you very much. I think one of, if I could probably go back about, and it's right that we did a consultative, a very long consultative meetings with the ecosystem, whether it's startups, ecosystem enablers, as well as more government stakeholders. Today, where we are, we started anchoring it into a policy itself, which is close to end, and we're going to be going through approval of that policy, which is the tech-enabled innovation policy itself. And what that policy gives us is an anchoring in terms of what are the conditions that startups are working in today. What kind of frameworks do they need? Do they need opening up of data from which sectors, etc.? Do we need to look at something that something like the arbitration laws that are here in Rwanda? This is something that we've discussed within the tech-enabled innovation policy, and that gives us almost a platform to say, okay, now let's provide these incentives within the Startup Act law for startups. But also, it's not a standalone. It's not going to be a standalone law. You know, early last year, the investment code, the partnership law, and the company law were amended, which are then going to be followed up with income tax law, VAT laws. That are, and then if you take all these laws together, what they're bringing on the table is that now we have an environment that is ready for more specific tax incentives or other incentives for startups themselves. So now we're in the, I would say, last phases of consultation, trying to see, to understand who is actually a startup in Rwanda, because, you know, in our economy, most of the companies are small and medium companies. So how do you differentiate between a startup and an SME in our own market, in our local context? And then you go on and see what kind of incentives are you providing them? What kind of incentives are we providing to the ecosystem enablers that are actually giving them that platform, whether they're incubators, accelerators that are in that ecosystem. So we're in the last phases of consultation, really putting, I would say, the dots on the E's, and hopefully in the next few months we'll have that law also going through approval, and of course we'll have a public consultation on the final law, the final incentives that we'll be putting in there for feedback and seeing if that aligns with our own ecosystem. Yeah.
So, and just to sort of piggyback on what you said, so if I'm a startup company, you know, watching this show right now, or I'm thinking of starting up a startup, so to speak, but in the tech field, because I think a lot of the, you know, obviously speaking, a lot of the focus will be on, you know, tech innovations that will revolutionize our, you know, different sectors, whether it's health, whether it's farming and that sort of thing. What are you telling them right now that you're putting in place, you know, in simple terms, a framework that will enable them, number one, to get access to information, access to funding, you know, tax incentives, whereby they will thrive in a particular ecosystem, whereby there's regulation, government regulation, focused on helping these companies thrive than it was before the Startup Act was. I want to just, if you could just explain, before the Startup Act, how are startups in Rwanda faring? What challenges is this act or this policy or this legislation going to, what changes is it bringing to really boost the growth of startups in this country?
So
from ideation to
growth.
To growth, yes.
So one of the key things, let's start from ideation. And I think this is a conversation that was on Twitter earlier today around where do you get funding from angel investors, right? Today, the investment code provides that angel investors will have particular incentives for them. So now the Startup Act will also recognize that investment and say, oh, you've received angel investment. Now you're in this bracket where you have a specific tax, whether it's tax holidays, whether it's especially tax holidays on different products, taxable products, let me call them taxable product and not be specific on any of them, so that you can be able to accelerate your growth. Be able to hire talent. I think that's one of the...
And talent is expensive.
talent is very expensive today. Be able to hire talent, be able to invest in the technology that you need to be investing in, whether building software, acquiring, I don't know, making any important investment, but also accelerating your growth. One of the key characteristics of a startup is how fast they can grow, right? If you look at some of the most emerging startups in Africa, or even like anywhere else, you see that a startup would, in 1 year, 2 years, will start being valued at 1 billion. Now I think that's the status we're on. And no more SMEs it will take, I think it will take about 30 years to go from SME to a high growth, not a high, like a big company. It will take 30 years. But here we're talking about companies that can go from, today I'm starting, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, I'm employing 100, 200 people.
And this is because of the nature of startups, the solutions that they solve.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's the fact that today, if I have a startup, let me use Yusuf, who's here. He's able to deploy his solution from Rwanda and go to 30 countries in the next few years. That's the nature of startups we're looking at. So the Startup Act 1, it would define who is actually characterized as a startup. And that's the first step of saying, then let's open up all these tax incentives to you.
Very, very important. Charles, do you want to say something? Okay. And let me kick off with all our guests, and then I think we can like break down what all our guests, have shared. Thank you very much for that. And, I'm sure viewers will be sharing some of their comments or requests for clarifications later. So, of course, when we talk about the startup ecosystem, we can't do it without looking at various investments or investments that aim to, boost the growth of these startups. And there's one company that is doing so, amongst others, but really taking the lead. And this is because, the startup ecosystem in Rwanda is looking quite promising. We've had, competitions when it comes to, looking at these young innovators and trying to hone their skill through certain platforms. I know you were part of the Hunger Pitch Festival, so was Yusuf here, but, different competitions, there's an increase of funding, there's an increase of access to information and talent, detection as well as mentorship. So really the ecosystem is really ripe for some of these investments. And Pascal, I'm going to go to you because I want us to talk about North and East Africa. And we know that it opened its regional entrepreneurship hub in Kigali just last year and already has 20 startup companies, Rwandan companies, that won an opportunity to benefit from the organization's health tech hub. Pascal, if you could tell us more about the work North and East Africa does, especially aimed at supporting the growth of startup companies, not only in Rwanda, but also across the continent. Pascal, are you with us? I think you need to switch off your video. Okay. Yes, there you are. Pascal, did you hear my question or would you want me to repeat it?
No, I did not hear your question.
Okay. So my question is basically if you could tell us more about the work North and East Africa does, especially with regards to helping boost startup companies in Rwanda and across Africa. And I mentioned that based on reports, we know that 20 startup companies already benefiting or going to benefit from your health tech hub. So just briefly tell us more about the work Norscan does. Why did it invest in Rwanda? Why has it created its space, its co-creation space, its incubation space, aimed at really boosting the growth of startup companies in the country and the continent?
Yeah, first, Diana, thank you for having me. Thank you, Charles. So Norscan believes that Kigali has an exciting future as one of the top tech ecosystems on the continent. And Norscan wants to be wants to be in the center of what's happening in the private sector by enabling the startups that will become the superstars of our ecosystem, not only solving the problems we have in Rwanda, but also solving the problems we are seeing across the continent, and the process creating jobs, creating wealth, and creating opportunities for many people that cannot necessarily access them with the current economic setup. So in terms of what exactly we are doing as Norsken, we provide infrastructure. As maybe some of you have already noticed, we took over the former École Belge, the Belgian school in the city center, back 2 years ago, 2019. That's now 3 years. And we started by renovating the old buildings. And those buildings, we opened them in December last year. And we are still constructing new buildings to host more than 1,000 people by the end of this year. But the reason we do this is to provide startups an office space somewhere in the city center that's very well connected, but also a place that they can have meetings, they can have like invited talents, but also like a place that the entire ecosystem can meet together, whether we're talking about the startups, the investors, and everybody that supports them in the process, in the growth process. So beyond this infrastructure, we also provide the networks. So you can imagine if you are an entrepreneur who was born maybe in Gatsata or born in Kayonza or Nyagatare, it's hard to build the networks you need to be able to create a business that will not only grow and conquer the Rwandan market, but also think about East Africa, the continent, maybe even global markets. So in that process, as you grow as an entrepreneur, you need a lot of support. You need a lot of networks, whether from investors or the people that will help you to access the markets. So that's also some of the support we provided to entrepreneurs by bringing in the people that have already that have experience building large-scale businesses like unicorns, bringing them to our ecosystem, bringing them to Kigali to be able to meet these entrepreneurs and building coaching, mentorship, or investment opportunities. And beyond that, we also provide the capital ourselves. So we are, Norsken is also an investor. We can invest in some of the startups, especially the ones that are most promising. The reason being that, as Esther already mentioned, if you were a startup and you're planning to grow very quickly, you will need a lot of resources, not just human capital, but also like even financial resources. And what we see is one of the biggest challenges for startups in Rwanda and African countries is access to capital. So we wanted to help solving that by directly investing in startups, but also encouraging other investors, whether locally or internationally, to take the risk and support our young entrepreneurs who are really working very hard to build the future we all want to be part of.
Thank you very much, Pascal. I just have a follow-up question. So, Norsken is, if you could just share more about its origins. Is it it's based in Sweden? Is Rwanda, the first African country where it's invested, over around $10 million, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of setting up this amazing structure that you have done in the city center. What is the background of Norsken, and especially what are your expectations looking long term of doing what you're doing in Rwanda? What do you envision when it comes to the startup ecosystem in Rwanda? And also just tell us a brief background about the foundation, or rather the company.
It's $20 million. Let me start from that. So Norsken, as you rightly point out, started in Sweden, and the founder of Norsken is a Swedish entrepreneur. So his name is Niklas. So he co-founded a fintech company that's called Klarna. It's now a $46 billion company. It's the largest fintech company, private fintech company in Europe. But back in 2015, he realized that it's so much easy for a company like his, like Klarna, to raise capital from investors. But if you are an entrepreneur working on impact businesses, let's say mental health, for example, like as you mentioned earlier in this conversation, or like if you're working on issues around climate change. Back in 2015, these issues were not really on the agenda of investors. So the idea behind Norsken was how can Niklas use his resources, like the wealth he accumulated in the process of building Klarna, to help these entrepreneurs who are solving global challenges and get them from outskirts of Stockholm and bring them to the city center where action happens, and help them access the right visibility they need to be able to attract talent, to attract investments, but also like really bring the attention to the general public of what kind of solutions are being built to address SDG challenges. So that started in 2016, but then once that initiative became a success, the next step was like, can we also like do this not just in Sweden but across the world? And of course, the first destination was Africa, because obviously Africa is the place where entrepreneurship can have the highest impact based on the challenges we all know. But where in Africa? Because Africa is a big continent with 53 or 54 countries, depending on who you ask. So in Africa, NORSCAN looked at Southern, Eastern, Northern, Central, and Western Africa, and the decision was made to go to Eastern Africa because that is the fastest growing part of the continent. But where do you go in East Africa, especially when you want to have that physical presence? So we looked at the cities like Dar es Salaam, Nairobi, Kampala, Kigali, and the final decision was made to go to Kigali, mainly for three reasons. First one being the obvious one, the ease of doing business, the low level of corruption, and really how the government does its best to welcome investors. That's one. Second is safety. Because if you're really trying to build something large, something big, you're going to attract investors like high net worth individuals. You want to bring them into a country that's safe, where they feel safe to walk at night and to go to the market, to the street, to talk to users of the technologies they're going to be investing in. So safety also played a role in that. And thirdly, which I think was actually the most important, was the fact that Rwanda is a small country. If you look at all the statistics compared to other ecosystems like Nigeria, like Kenya, South Africa, or even Egypt, that's now emerging. But the fact that it's small actually is a huge opportunity, because speaking of policies, Rwanda is trying to position itself as the proof of concept market. So it means if you have an innovation, you have something exciting you are developing, and you want to test it somewhere in real life, it's so much easier, so much cheaper, and less risky to test it in Rwanda than, for example, going to a much bigger country. But if you can test it in Rwanda and prove that this works, you can build a story, you can build a narrative, you can use that impact to attract talent, to attract capital that will help you grow, and as you scale into even bigger markets. So we really believed in that scale of the market. Also, like based on our own history in Sweden, because Sweden is Stockholm is a small city of 1 million, but it has more unicorn startups than Berlin, which is a much bigger city in a much bigger country. So we believe that if we can build something that works in Rwanda, that can be useful for Rwandans, it becomes easier to scale to the rest of the continent and build these unicorns we're talking about.
Thank you, Pascal. We'll definitely get back to you, but that's a fantastic story. Just also understanding the rationale of such an important investment for the startup ecosystem in Rwanda. And yeah, we'll definitely get back to you on what you envision, what NORSCAN envisions in the next couple of years. I'd like to go to our guest, our youthful guest who's here with us, Yusuf Mwari, the co-founder and CEO of BAG Innovation Rwanda. And Yusuf, your startup, BAG Innovation, was founded in 2017. It is a virtual internship system that develops, tracks, and matches students with the right market needs upon graduation. I think this is a brilliant, sort of startup or solution and technology to solve this issue. We always talk here on the Square about how we can link our graduates to labor, the labor market, the job market, and relevant linkages, and what platforms exist to help students really connect with the proper jobs. And we have Career Day, we have a couple of initiatives, but I think this solution is very welcome, and I'm really happy to hear more of what it does. So if you could just, number one, tell us about Bag Innovation Rwanda, more of what it does, the countries it operates in, and also just the genesis of your journey. Where did you begin? What are some of the challenges you faced, and how are you faring right now within the startup ecosystem in Rwanda?
Sure. Thank you very much, Diana. Yes, as you mentioned, my name is Yusuf Nwadi. I'm a Rwandan entrepreneur and the CEO of Bag Innovation. Bag Innovation started in 2017, and we're now proud to say that we started with only 2 founders. And now we have about 13 people in the office here in Kigali. We're currently based in Kigali in Rwanda, and yeah, the journey really started in 2017 after realizing a huge problem when it comes to the talent space here in Africa, but mostly in Rwanda. I myself, I was graduating from my high school studies and trying to really navigate what are the different universities that I can go to that can set me up for my future. And after really interacting with a lot of young people, I could not find any university that actually, a lot of people had a lot of good reviews for, in terms of like, I went to this university and it was easy for me to be able to transition to the employment market. And one of the biggest problems that I realized was a lot of young people were saying, yeah, I went to university, but I'm still not able to get jobs. But the problem is, when I started speaking to a lot of employers, interesting enough, a lot of them were saying, we have the jobs, but we cannot find the right talented people. So what we quickly realized, my co-founder and I, is that there's a huge mismatch between the university system and the labor market. And quickly, by being very curious about the problem, we started really researching what actually makes a talent become productive for a company and hireable. And that's when we came up with an idea of Bag Innovation. And essentially what we're trying to do is we go to the university students and we say, hey, look, your university degree is not going to be enough to get you the job. Why? Because university is great, but the curriculum is really focused on theoretical teaching. And the problem is that the labor market is growing rapidly. So for example, if you are a finance student right now, how many times are you actually getting to do a lot of practical Excel exercises as you're going through your studies? If you really analyze it, it's less. A lot of people are not really getting to practice theoretical learning with market relevant experience. And we go to the businesses and we say, hey, building a pipeline is the future for you to be able to solve your employment and talent needs. So what we do is we take on young people and we say, here's how it will look like to actually work for a specific company. And we provide them with different tasks and different scenarios of what a real job will look like with that company. And they get to solve some of these challenges. And through that, we provide them with accurate feedback on what they need to work on and what skills they need to build. And we assist them in building these skills. So therefore, we're able to build a pipeline for employers so that whenever you're hiring, you know that you're going to find young people who understand your company, and you can already make a better judgment by seeing their portfolio of some of the tasks they've been working on through our platform. So that is basically what Bag Innovation is trying to do here. And we've been able to work with over 8,000 students here in Rwanda. We're servicing over 200 businesses and working with different universities to be able to reach more people.
Thank you, Yusuf. And if I may just quickly ask before I open up to Charles, who I'm sure has a lot to say. So can you share with us some sort of concrete examples between how many linkages you've been able to do or matching between university graduates and jobs, job openings or companies, corporates, organizations, some sort of numbers in terms of successful linkages where these people are actually employed by these companies?
Yes, that's a very good question. So far, since we started, we've been able to place over 600 young people into income-generating opportunities. So these These are paid internships all the way to part-time jobs and full-time employment. Super proud to even say that just this week, we've been able to place already 2 young people into income-generating opportunities, which is huge. And all of this is by working with their employer to really understand what the role is about and giving a little bit of a taste to the young people of this is how it will look like to work with that company, work on these challenges, and we provide them with feedback, and we're able to make this kind of matchmaking. So 600 so far, and the number is increasing on, I would say, monthly basis.
And has it been easy for you? Your journey, Esther is here telling us how the government is really invested in, making sure companies like yours thrive and grow. And you're talking about 2017, we're in 2022, and your numbers are quite interesting. Just briefly, what has it been like for you?
Has it been easy? I would say that if it was super easy, a lot of people would be entrepreneurs by now. It's not that easy. I would say that it's very challenging, but I think there's a lot of talks about what gets you through entrepreneurship is the passion that you have to solve a specific problem. If you don't have it, it's not really worth it. Yeah. So we've been lucky to have a passion for youth development and really seeing a lot of young people transition from school to employment. That has kept us going. It hasn't been easy in a way that in the early days, we really wanted to understand the problem. Obviously, we didn't spend a lot of years studying the problem of youth unemployment, so we didn't have that kind of knowledge. So we had to find a way to access a lot of data in terms of how many young people are there in Rwanda, how many are in school, how many are not in school, why they're not in school, how many are in internships, and all of that information, which was really, really time consuming to find appropriate information. But also at the same time, being able to, some of the biggest universities here in Rwanda are public universities, so which means that you need an approval from a higher institution to be able to penetrate some of these universities. So one of the challenges was getting access to them. So obviously, as an early stage startup, it's not very easy because you don't have that track record for anyone to be able to open their doors and allow you to work with their students or their individuals. So that wasn't easy, but we're able to keep pushing and adopt different creative ways of attracting young people. So we're able to use social media to be able to attract young people to our office. And by doing that, we started realizing that a lot of students were talking about BAG in their campuses, and we implemented a model called the Student Ambassador Program, where we would have a lot of young people representing us in the universities as a way to be able to solve that problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yusuf. Charles, your thoughts?
I mean, first of all, I think for purposes of emphasis, it should be clear that when we talk of startups, especially as far as this show is concerned, we're generally talking about tech startups. Otherwise, to the best of my knowledge, Blue Oceans is a startup.
No, tech startups. Like I said earlier on,
and that has sort of eluded a lot of people as we coast along. But whether it's Yusuf or Pascal, they say things that are very dear to me, and I believe as we talk about tech startups, the number one way of approaching it, in my opinion, should be by first of all looking at the existing challenges. And as a business person, I believe that every challenge means an opportunity.
An opportunity, absolutely.
And some of the things that continue being teething, and I'll probably give 2 or 3 examples that immediately come into my mind. Something that we did discuss, I think, 2 shows ago on banning editions around the efficiency in the medical services space. The fact that there is no single clinic or hospital that you can walk into and you say, I was satisfied by the service, with the exception of the doctor that you met. So the only thing that is satisfying is that you will see an amazing specialist and he will tell you what you're suffering from and give you, hopefully, the right diagnosis. But the whole experience is a huge nightmare. And I ask myself, it may not be use of space. It may probably be one of the areas that the likes of Norsken are going to look into. But that's just one example to tell you that it's a huge problem. And as we talked about this on the square about 2-3 shows ago, it's the volume of money that is being lost by everybody along the value chain, the hospitals, the insurance companies, and what have you, around these inefficiencies.
And patients.
Yes,
who bear
and
the
patients
brunt
themselves, who bear the huge brunt around that. But let me also talk, and I'm glad Esther is here. The government of Rwanda and the way it operates is extremely inefficient.
Inefficient?
Yes, inefficient. And we have said this on the square quite a number of times. And two areas that we've pointed out are how they coordinate with one another, right? And you ask yourself, in this day and age, we should not be sitting in a meeting and saying, no, this is not a Ministry of Infrastructure problem. You address it to the city of Kigali, and so on and so forth. You'd imagine there is a startup somewhere that has already figured out that by the time an application for a waste treatment something goes through RDB, there is a system that has already figured out where it is supposed to be oriented, and within very reasonable time, the relevant institutions have figured that out, right? But that's just institutional coordination, but which is our anthem here. But the second one is really around timely response. And those are two, if we go through the others around VAT refund, which comes back to hurt the tech startups and how they will survive in their businesses and so on and so forth. Esther was telling us about the enabling environment and the tax sort of regulations that they're putting in place, and so on and so forth. So I started this conversation by saying that for the tech startups to be more and more relevant in today's marketplace, they should primarily concentrate on the existing challenges, and they don't have to look too far. They just have to look in our day-to-day lives on some of these things that pain our lives, but also that pain business. Yes.
So yeah, I agree with you. You're basically saying they don't need to look too far to reinvent the wheel. There are gaps that they can find solutions to, and you're talking about areas of government efficiency. I wouldn't agree with you saying the entire government of Rwanda is inefficient. Maybe there's some blankets or some pockets that need some improvement, but you're right about institutional coordination. If we're going to have a different institution talking to another institution to enable the general well-being of different aspects of whether it's private sector, startups, and that sort of thing. I want to go back to our guests, and Esther and Pascal and Yusuf. I just wanted to tap on anything you may have wanted to say in response to either Pascal or Yusuf or Charles. And I'll kick off with you, Esther.
Thank you. I think let me start with Charles, and then I'll go around on finish on investment. One of the things that is always very interesting is if you look at our NST1, especially in the ICT sector, is we want to digitize all government services by 2024. Hopefully we get there. So one of the...
But right now there's a percentage of government services that are digitized.
Through eRembo.
Through eRembo, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the strategies that we're also moving towards is zero paper, zero trip. That means if you're asking, and I think today if you look at birth certificates, you no longer need to go and collect them anywhere. Request, they get to you, etc. So how do you build all those systems into place and for most of those services? The other day, I think internally we were having a sample conversation just saying we may have all these different services that you go and request. I'm asking Charles, I'm asking Nan, I'm asking Esther, but then if you digitize, you find that, it should have been only one service or one request through that. And I think through the work that all the different services are doing, especially our chief digital officers, which are some of the offices that I'm always excited about because they are really championing digital transformation from each of the sectors. Then you find that at some point we'll get to a point where we slowly and surely try and eliminate some of these inefficiencies, which is always a work in progress. I think everywhere it's a work in progress, which we'll get to. We'll get to that, I think. For me, and then another thing that we've been testing is procurement for innovation. Mm-hmm. And I like that you were saying that which startup has figured that out. Last year we were trying to test out what if a startup is thinking about this solution. Is government able to procure that particular solution and implement that? And what that means is, so we're still in the testing phase and trying to understand how would that process go? How does the procurement law actually need to change? Because there's a law that needs to change, and then you have to go and convince everyone that actually this law needs to change. And how do you again incorporate, if we're saying that we have low corruption rate, but also keep that intact into the system? Because you're essentially saying a startup that is 3 months old is able to come and provide government with a particular service. So how do you make sure that the law is changed, one, to accommodate that change, but also make sure that we are not causing any other problem into the ecosystem. So that's one. Hopefully we'll get there very soon, and we'll see some of these changes happening. And also the biggest motivation is government is still the biggest spender in the economy. So if we want to grow a tech ecosystem, at some point, in some way, we have to find a way to do this. So let's work towards that. And then on investment, one of the key areas that I wanted to touch upon is there's investment, there's also talent. A few years back, I think we used to have an ecosystem where it was very hard to find a startup that has been funded at ideation stage. You know, everyone will want proof of revenue. Have you already sold something? Are you already revenue generating?
Before you invest in them.
Before you invest in
yes.
$10,000 for 50%
yes.
of your company, right? Today we're starting to see angel investors coming up in the ecosystem and saying, for me, I have, because probably I have experience, but also I have some money saved up, let me invest in this company, and then also bring on my expertise to support their growth. And that compounds into putting these startups on a pathway. You'll be able to be eligible for what Pascal was talking about, that the fund that they have. You're eligible for things like the Rwanda Innovation Fund that have a ticket size of 100,000 to 250,000, etc. And then we have talent pool. One, and I think within this pandemic, one thing we've learned is the world is the world. It's one family, really, right? I think with a few months back, last year, there's a company a founder that came in Rwanda, coming from Nigeria, and they hosted a space on Twitter talking about why they were interested in setting up in Rwanda. And really, when I talk about investment, that was not some of the most interesting part, but it was the fact that, I come to Rwanda, it's an easy space to work from, I can register my business very quickly, but also if I have talent, they can come and work from Rwanda. So if today you're a Rwandan young person who's looking for a job, your competition is the world, is fellow young Rwandans. So how do you, as young people, position ourselves to compete globally, but also if we're entrepreneurs, compete also globally at that level? So I think that's the setup. And then when you say we're a proof of concept hub, I think that also is applicable for Rwandan startups. It's not only I'm trying to attract Pan-African startups from, Egypt, South Africa, everywhere. But the idea is, as a Rwandan founder, how do you make Rwanda your test bed and you scale across Africa?
Across Africa. So you're looking at a market that's bigger than Rwanda and the region. You're looking at the globe.
Exactly.
In a nutshell, that's what you're saying.
Yes.
This is how our startup entrepreneurs need to start thinking.
Yes, yeah.
I really like that. I want us to go to a Twitter feed. I thought we'd have a round where everyone gets to talk about what the other said, but yes, we do have limited time here. I would like to go to your first tweet, if you could have that on our screens. And this is a regular, commentator. I really appreciate his tweets. He says that, and I think he's tweeting all the way from Nigeria, he says that several valid points on the conducive climate for startups in Rwanda, and from personal interactions with African startups as startup founders, a lot to see Rwanda as having favorable conditions to birth their innovations. So his first question is, are the current policies ready for African unions? Sorry, African Union. Yes, are we ready for African unicorns? And I would like you to just break down what that means. But it's one of those, in my understanding, startups that just explode and.
Exactly. So a unicorn company is a company that has reached a valuation of $1 billion.
$1 billion.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think last year we saw a first African company get to that valuation, I think in less than 18 months of existence. I think today the best place to say that how are we ready is to look at what the Kigali International Finance Center is doing, right? Because for a company that is valued at $1 billion, the financial services that they require and instruments are very critical to how fast that they can grow, how fast they can access other markets, etc. And I think the work that the Kigali International Finance Center is doing, whether it's enabling fintechs themselves, but also enabling normal investment to come and be domiciled here in Rwanda,
facilitates this.
Yes, gives us a platform for unicorns.
For unicorns in Rwanda. I hope Dolapo has his question answered. His other tweet coming from us, if we could have that on our screens, please. He asks, and this is to Pascal. Pascal alluded to a fund set aside to assist Rwandan startups. How do Rwandan startups access these investment funds? This is his tweet to Pascal, and I'll just give Pascal an answer to answer this, as briefly as possible. Pascal, are you still with us?
Yes, simple. You go to our website, nosken22.com, and you will find the process. You can also go to our website, nosken.org. You also find other information for much smaller funds that can be accessed by smaller startups locally, but also within the region.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Yusuf before I go to Charles. And Yusuf, we're coming towards the end of the show, and I just want to hear sort of closing remarks or, ideas in terms of how you think this Rwandan ecosystem can be strengthened. So you're an actor. You're one of the key stakeholders as an actor, a startup company. What sort of support would you say, especially to policymakers, to leaders in the captains of industry in the private sector, who local Rwandans who can invest, or international investors? What is your message in terms of support a company like you or other startups need in Rwanda to just really boost this ecosystem?
Sure. Thank you very much, Diana. I would say for the startup ecosystem to really grow, there's a lot of different items that have to be kind of like worked on. And one of them is, number one, I think Esther kind of alluded on the conversation going on Twitter about angel investment. And my opinion on angel investment, because we need more, let's say, high net worth individuals who are in Rwanda to start understanding the concept of startups and actually believe that startups can actually grow and become a significant and bring on a significant return for the investors. And that really starts by really showcasing the startups and making sure that people actually know that people are working on innovative solutions. That is number one. Number two is really allowing foreign investment to be made into Rwandan companies. I think one of the challenges that we face as BAG is that we were trying to attract a lot of foreign investment. But one of the problems that happen is that a lot of our investors would say, in Rwanda there is not a lot of laws around, let's say, things like safes. And you have to set up your entity in Delaware or another place in the world. And we believe that that becomes a very big challenge because we would want to still be based in Rwanda, because being based in another country, we don't have any power there. And I would say that kind of facilitation would be really beneficial for early stage startups that are trying to attract a lot of foreign investment. And just, I would say, Esther and the team at the Ministry of ICT are doing an amazing job by really coming to the ground and speaking to the companies and trying to understand what are the challenges that we're facing. And and that's how we get to kind of like work on things like the Startup Act and get to see how are we incentivizing other young people like myself in Rwanda to actually start businesses? Because right now, one of the reasons I believe that a lot of people are not venturing into the startup or entrepreneurship space is that they're not seeing a lot of success stories. They're not seeing a lot of young people building great companies and getting rewarded for it. And therefore, people think that it's a very high-risk kind of career. So those are some of the things that I would say would strengthen the ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. I'd like to go to Pascal, just closing remarks. And your closing remarks, if you could just briefly tell us what you really envision for your company in terms of the investment that is made in the Rwandan startup ecosystem. Over to you, Pascal, as briefly as possible.
Yes, so we are talking about business here. So when we talk about support, let's always remember that we're talking about like players that are not part of the transaction. So you're talking about a business, it's about demand and supply. So we have enough supply, so a lot of young people are building very brilliant solutions for the challenges we face, but also we need to work on the demand. So we need to see young people in Rwanda, like Rwandans themselves, using the solutions that are developed by our own startups. So part of the work we're doing as Northcan is to make sure like people like Yusuf or like the other founders that are starting startups are actually the role models of society, and we see them as stars and like people that should be supported by the entire country. So that's the future we envision when we all use our own solutions developed by our entrepreneurs.
Thank you. I really like the last part of your closing remarks. I absolutely agree with you. Charles, I'd like to just hear what you have to say before we give our closing remarks to Esther.
As I went down, just to one of my wind down points around what Pascal has just said, around it's basically old school thinking, old school managers, old school financiers, old school banks and what have you, that have to go with the times in which we are and finding a mechanism in which we are not left aback by. Because what these guys like Yusuf and Pascal are doing is that they're innovating for the future. So if you're going to stay aback and think you're going to continue with your old school way of doing things, you will remain in the museums. But the other thing I want to raise is really around that the startups, the tech startups and what have you are businesses like any other. And part of the policy, I think, conversation that Esther and your crew should be having is around addressing the other issues that are affecting any other business. You don't want Yusuf to thrive tomorrow, offer a service to a certain government entity, and he's not paid on time, if at all paid. So such things that should really be addressed. Reliability of internet, cost of finance, and so on and so forth. So the usual thing, as you're talking about creating an enabling environment, let it not be uniquely geared towards the startups. By the time the startups are flourishing, there should be a mechanism under which the usual teething problems that we have faced, that I've just mentioned earlier on, that businesses are facing on a day-to-day basis, are already being addressed, and that will even make the attraction that Yusuf was talking about even a lot better. We should not struggle with things like forex trading, for example. He's not going to attract hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in the kwacha. It will come in euros or in US dollars, and they will expect to be remunerated in the same currency. So those are some of the things that I think we need to address to ensure that all this effort that has been put in place gets reward.
Thanks, Charles. Esther?
Oh, thank you. For me, I'm very excited about where we are today. I think 10 years ago, these are the kind of conversation that we were not yet dreaming about. So I'm pretty much excited, and I'll echo what everyone has said. Let's support our startups, and especially with technology regardless of what we think about it, will be disrupted by it. So would rather be disrupted by partnering with the startups and Rwandan startups that are actually creating that disruption than for that wave to come and sweep us off with someone else that is not our young people that need the job, that are creating that value. So let's create that value together.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm really excited about this whole Startup Act. I like, number one, that it was a very consultative process with all the stakeholders. So, from a policy perspective, private sector perspective, the startup companies themselves, the solution-oriented, conversations, and the fact that we need to look at startups as these are really entities that can revolutionize a lot of the issues that we face, not only on the continent, but in Rwanda as well. Whether it's health, whether it's, agriculture, these are really interesting solutions that can really enable us to even leapfrog some of these issues that we're still dealing with as a country and as a continent. So I'd like to thank our guests once again. Pascal, if we can have you on our screens. Thank you for tuning in. For joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. Yusuf, it's been a pleasure having you. I hope this is not your last time coming on the square.
Thank you very much for having me.
And all the best with Bag Innovation Rwanda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Esther, it's your second time. I really know there'll be a third and fourth, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much on behalf of the Ministry in ICT and Innovation for joining us and sharing the very exciting and important work that the Ministry is doing.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Charlie, always a pleasure, co-hosting with you. To our viewers, thank you so much. Keep the conversation going using #TheSquareRW. And to our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for always supporting The Square. Have a good night. See you again next week.
How to get it? RBA app is here. How to get it? It is easier than ever. Go on your home screen. Press Play Store or App Store. Type RBA. Search. There you go. You have RBA app.